Welcome back to the Muse and Greg. We've previously looked at Liqui-Moly's Diesel Intake Decarb and found it works pretty well in some situations. Today, we're putting it head to head with a lesser known product called Revive Turbo Cleaner and Power Restorer. It's from a UK company called Direction Plus. As usual, I bought both these products with my own money. Although after I'd done this and used up both products, I discovered some further tests were needed, so Direction Plus sent me a second bottle free of charge to do these follow-up tests. We'll start with an overview of both products. We'll then test Revive on a vehicle with a catch can installed where the intake buildup will be fairly dry, but we'll put a borescope camera down the intake before and after using Revive to see if it makes any difference. When it comes to the head-to-head test of these products, clearly it's impossible to test two different manifold cleaning products on a vehicle which only has one manifold, unless you do one after the other, in which case the second product gets an unfair advantage from the cleaning work done by the first. So what we'll do next is remove the upper manifold from this vehicle and test both Liqui-Moly and Revive at the same time on opposite sides of the same manifold, and then finish up with some bench tests of both products on different types of manifold buildup. Now just a heads up that once this video is done, I'll be removing the catch can from this vehicle and doing a separate review of Revive once the whole intake's got a good dose of oil and gunk in it. This will show how well Revive works on a typical direct injection turbo diesel vehicle with an oily intake system. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that when it comes. So let's talk a bit about the two products first. We've talked about Liqui-Moly before, so I won't spend too much time on it here. It comes in a 326 gram aerosol can with a 60 centimetre long straw to squirt the product deep inside the manifold. I bought it on sale from Autobarn at $23.99, which is the best price I've ever seen on it. That works out to around about $7.35 per 100 grams. Here are the instructions in case you've not seen this product before. Revive comes in a large 750ml bottle, and since 1ml of this product weighs about 1 gram, you get about 750 grams of product, or just over twice as much as the Liqui-Moly. Instead of being in an aerosol, it includes a spray nozzle with a really nifty hand pump that pressurizes the container so the product can be squirted out. The best price I found was $108 for the 750ml bottle, which works out to around about $14.40 per 100 grams, or roughly double the cost per litre of the Liqui-Moly. Let's hope it works twice as well to justify the cost. The straw supplied with the Revive is only needed if you're going to use the bottle with a sprayer at the top. The straw will be needed to suck the product up from the bottom of the bottle in that situation. If you're using it upside down, the liquid would already be flooding the pump inlet, so the straw's not needed. Revive comes with a nice double-sided instruction sheet. The instructions are pretty straightforward. With the engine cold or lukewarm, just not hot, disconnect the air intake after the airbox and airflow meter. Pump the pump to pressurise the bottle, then squeeze the trigger to spray the product into the air intake. For engines under 5 litres, you'll do 3 separate 60-second shots of 250ml each. Above 5 litres, you'll need a second bottle and the shots will be twice as long. Each shot of the product is done at slightly different engine speeds, and there's a resting stage between shots 2 and 3 for the product to soak in. After use and reconnecting everything, you take the vehicle for a 20-minute run to completely clear everything out. The only difficult thing about the instructions are that some of the diagrams they show for calculating dose volume versus engine size are initially a bit confusing to follow, but if you follow what I just said, you'll be fine. Now, it's always wise to check the safety data sheet on a product before you use it so you know what its hazards are and how to use it safely. But a safety data sheet also tells you something about what the product's made from. So when we look at the SDS for Liqui-Moly, we find that it consists almost entirely of acetone and a petroleum-based solvent known as heavy aromatic naphtha. These are solvents designed to dissolve oil and soot so it can get washed through the engine and burnt. But like most petroleum-based solvents, they're highly flammable, so they can't be sprayed anywhere in the vicinity of hot exhaust gases such as you get around the turbo. I was really interested in Revive because, as you can see from the packet and from the SDS, it uses a non-flammable, water-based detergent formulation, not a petroleum-based solvent. We'll talk about why that matters in a minute, but let's look at the product itself first. The big difference between the two products is that because Revive is a non-flammable water-based product, it can be sprayed into the intake system before the turbo with no risk of explosion from a hot turbo, as might happen if you did the same with the Liqui-Moly. As a result, Revive claims to be able to clean the whole intake path from the turbo all the way through the intercooler and the plumbing, the manifold and into the engine, whereas Liqui-Moly and many other petroleum-based products have to be sprayed into the inlet manifold and don't clean the earlier parts of the intake. So it's going to be very interesting to see how well a detergent-based cleaner works compared to a traditional solvent. Two last points about the products. Firstly, Liqui-Moly is supposed to be used when the engine is warm, and Revive is supposed to be used when the engine is cold. I imagine this is because you're spraying cold liquid directly onto what could be a really hot turbo. However, I did check with Direction Plus and they confirmed it would be fine to use their product on a warm engine provided it has been left to cool down for a little while. This will make it a lot easier to compare the two products under comparable conditions. The second point is that because this vehicle itself has been run for quite a while with the catch can, the manifold buildup is quite dry and carbony rather than the usual oily muck you get without a catch can. I found in a previous video that Liqui-Moly really struggled to remove this dry soot from the manifold. I mentioned this to Direction Plus and they confirmed that Revive should clean dry soot as well as oily buildup. Okay, enough about the products, let's take a look at the test vehicle. We're doing today's tests on the same vehicle all the previous tests have been done on. This 2012 Mitsubishi Pajero, which now has about 275,000 kilometres on the clock. Most of that's been highway driving, towing a caravan around different parts of Australia. This vehicle's had a ProVent 200 catch can installed since the upper part of the manifold was completely cleaned at about 230,000 k's. So any build-up in the upper manifold now has come since the catch can was installed. So here's what we said we were going to cover in part 1, and we've already done the overview. Let's now put the borescope camera down inside this vehicle's intake plumbing so we can see what sort of conditions we're trying to clean. Firstly, let's have a look at the compressor wheel on the turbo. You can see that it's got some black on it. That's just a very, very fine coating of probably just dried cooked oil, I'd say that is. Give it a bit of a scrape with a screwdriver, and there's just a tiny bit there. Bit of a wipe with my finger, and again just a slight smear there on the turbo. Now we take the pipe off that leads into the inlet of the turbo. This pipe here is where the crankcase fumes come in. You can see it's a bit oily down the bottom of that pipe. And when we look deeper in there, you can see up further there is some deposit there from some of those crankcase fumes. Outlet of the turbo is pretty clean. Now we take the pipe off going from the turbo to the intercooler. Again, the inside of this is looking pretty clean. Give it a little bit of a wipe, and there's just a small amount of oil there. Not a lot, but there's a bit of an oil smear. Now we go from the pipe that's going down into the intercooler. We're getting closer and closer to the intercooler here. Again, give the inside of this pipe a bit of a wipe. And there's a little bit more oil there. Probably it's built up a little bit more, so it'd be interesting to see what's down inside the intercooler. Let's chuck the borescope camera down now and take a look down inside the intercooler and see what we can find. Just a little bit of oil on the inside like we saw before. What about further down? This is right where the pipe goes into the intercooler. You can see the start of the intercooler just around the corner. There is a bit of oil sitting around those that little joint we can just see in front of us. And if we sort of push the camera around that corner, you can see quite a bit of oil that's smeared all over the inside of that intercooler. So as you go further around, you can see once again quite a lot of black. Now remember, this car's got a catch can on at the moment and has had for about 40,000 k's. So this is probably stuff that's been there for quite a long time. So there's a reasonable amount of stuff there for the Revive to get rid of. When I pulled the camera out of the intercooler, it had some wet oil around the lens. This just confirms what we thought earlier, that while the residue near the turbo was quite dry, there's still some oil deeper down towards the intercooler. So we've gone all through the intercooler. Let's now check what sort of deposit we've got inside the manifold. And as you can see, same sort of stuff as what we've had before. Sort of fairly dry, toothpastey, chalky stuff. It's got a little bit of oil to it. It's not completely powdery. When you sort of give it a bit of a smear with your finger, you can see it smears a bit like dried toothpaste would. So there's a tiny bit of oil mixed up with there, but it's still mainly carbonised exhaust gas. So now we know what sort of mess it is we're trying to clean up. Let's get Revive onto the job and see how well it works. So undo the bottle lid, screw on the pump. And now what we need to do is to pump the bottle 25 times before we start. So this is pressurises the bottle. Just let it go. So 121, we'll start that back up at 125. So we're just at 125 now. Right, so that's the cleaning done. Let's now pop the camera back down and see how well it worked. Firstly, the pipe from the airbox to the turbo. It had this brown dust mixed in with it before, with the dried oil, and it really doesn't look any different afterwards. And you be the judge of that, but it looks pretty similar to me. Next we come to the turbo compressor wheel. It also doesn't look any different to me. The grey patches on the vanes look about the same size, and the scratches in the grey deposit I made with the screwdriver are just as well defined as they were before. So Revive doesn't seem to have done anything so far. Now we come to the turbo outlet pipe. This had an oily smear on the inside of it before. After using Revive, there's still residue on the inside, but while you can't see it in the photo, the residue did seem a little bit drier than it was before using Revive. Now we come to the intercooler itself, and this is where things get interesting, because you can immediately see that after using Revive, the inside of the intercooler is noticeably cleaner than before. The black smears on the flat portion and on the ribs have been largely cleaned off. As we go further down into the intercooler, you can see the ribs are obviously cleaner than they were before. There's still some black down in the valleys, but I'd say a good 90% of it's gone, possibly even more. So the question now is, why did Revive work so well here, and it didn't work so well earlier in the intake? Well, my guess is that despite what Direction Plus said, Revive really works best when there's oil present for it to dissolve, but it struggles more on dry carbon. But we'll be able to check that soon when we come to clean the dry carbon from off the inside of the inlet manifold. Now I put the camera down the manifold just to see what was going on, and because there's a lot of fumes in there, while it looks really pretty, it's actually hard to see what's going on. You can see there's some oily gunk along the bottom of the manifold, and towards the back as we go past the end you can see there's this grey soot, quite obvious back there. When we get the upper manifold off though, it'll be a lot easier to see what's going on. Now as part of this review, I was going to test how much these changes really mattered in the real world by measuring how effectively the intercooler could remove heat before and after using Revive. I spent a heap of time doing a lot of measurements, but in the end there was only a very small improvement, so I decided not to waste your time by including it in this video. My guess is that most of the oil had already been blown out of the intercooler since installing the catch can, so there wasn't enough there to make an appreciable difference. However, if you're interested in those tests particularly, I'll upload it as a separate video here so you can watch that separately to this one. I do however intend to repeat this test in part 2 of the series once the whole intake's got a lot more oil in it, so stay tuned for that. So now we've seen all that, let's scrape some samples of dry carbon from the upper manifold and soak them in both Liqui-Moly and Revive to see which product breaks it down better. So let's put some product in each container. Let's now get a bit of manifold gunk into each cup. Remember, because this vehicle has a catch can installed, the manifold build-up is quite dry and carbony. Let's start the timer and see how each product breaks down the deposits. Both products had some slight stirring while they were being moved to this spot, but after a minute and a half, you can see the Liqui-Moly is definitely darker than the Revive, even though it started off lighter in colour. This means Liqui-Moly's solvents are breaking down the carbon more effectively than the detergents in Revive. After 10 minutes, we can see lots of very small particles of carbon in the Liqui-Moly, which shows it's continued to break down the carbon into smaller and smaller pieces just like it should. When we come to revive, at first glance it doesn't look a whole lot different to before. However, if you compare it closely with the 1 minute shot, you can see that it has in fact broken down some of the carbon. There are some smaller pieces of black than before, and some patches actually look bigger than they did because they've started to collapse and spread out at the bottom of the cup. The carbon hasn't dissolved into the solution as much, which is why the colour is largely unchanged. It's certainly not done as much as the Liqui-Moly, but it's not done nothing either. The difference between the two products is further demonstrated when we give each of them a swirl. Liqui-Moly, you can see there are heaps of tiny carbon particles dissolved in the product, which makes the whole solution quite dark. With Revive, there's less of a change. The small bits get dissolved into the solution and make it slightly darker, but there are still lots of larger particles which haven't dissolved as well. After 2 hours, the difference is even more obvious. Liqui-Moly is completely black, while Revive still has lumps of carbon in it. So it's clear in this test that we got better results from the Liqui-Moly. However, remember that the instructions for Liqui-Moly don't say to turn off the engine during cleaning to let the product soak in. So in normal use, Liqui-Moly wouldn't have more than about the 3 minutes the whole cleaning process takes to get its job done. The cleaning process with Revive takes closer to 10 minutes and includes a 3 to 4 minute soak stage, so time is a bit more on its side, even though the Liqui-Moly is probably still more effective after 2 minutes than Revive was after 10. Now, it's not surprising that a petroleum-based solvent dissolves oil and carbon better than a water-based detergent does, but remember that these aren't quite apples for apples products. You can't clean your whole intake system with Liqui-Moly. It's only for the manifold and beyond. If you're going to try to clean the turbo side of the engine, you have to use something non-flammable, and Direction Plus probably accepted a less effective water-based formulation for Revive precisely so it can be sprayed through the whole intake system and clean everything out. That all said, Liqui-Moly clearly had the edge in this test. Let's now pull the upper manifold off the vehicle and spray both products on the carbony deposit and see how each product performs there. Remember that this manifold has already had Revive sprayed through it. As you can see, there's, again, a reasonable amount of dry, actually very hard deposits on there. So let's spray some Revive onto it this side of the manifold. There it goes. It's just washed on there. And we'll give it a bit of a scrub. Not that you can do this in real life, but just to see whether the carbon's been loosened at all. If we give this a wipe in the spot we just cleaned, it's definitely dissolved some of the carbon from the rag, but it certainly hasn't taken it all off because you can't see through to the silver alloy underneath the residue that's still left behind. Let's now flip the manifold around and clean the other side with the Liqui-Moly. Okay, that's probably about the same amount. And as you can see, it soaks in quite a bit. If it is loose, then there's a much better chance that it'll be pulled free from the manifold by the product dragging across it during cleaning. So this helps us determine how effective each product is likely to be. It seems to come out a little bit looser. I'm spraying this from a bit of a distance to make sure that the higher pressure in the Liqui-Moly can isn't blasting the carbon off. So I'm seeing a little bit of silver in there now. You should be able to see that just in here, some of that silver where it's been scrubbed. Let's pop a second dose of Revive on the other side, just like we did for the Liqui-Moly. But the Revive didn't seem to clean it as well, even after it had a bit of a scrub. It doesn't do anything. So that's what the Liqui-Moly did. And that's what the Revive did. Just to make sure the high pressure in the Liqui-Moly can wasn't giving it an unfair advantage over the Revive, I attached the misting straw you'd normally be using, which reduces the pressure to more like what the Revive has. I sprayed some product onto the back of the manifold to see how well Liqui-Moly works on dry carbon without the added advantage of the extra pressure. And as you can see, only after a short period of time, it's certainly softened that carbon up quite a bit. So while Liqui-Moly says to just run the product through the engine in one hit, this and our manifold test a few minutes ago shows the product actually soaks into the carbon quite well and softens it up. So there's value in copying Revive's instructions by turning the engine off halfway through and letting the product soak in and soften the carbon for a few minutes before continuing the clean. So I then completely cleaned the upper manifold with Liqui-Moly to prepare it for the next test. When I realised that neither product had really romped at home on the dry carbon, I contacted a mate of mine who's got a 2020 Pajero with about 80,000 k's on the clock and it's never had a catch can. I scraped some oily gunk from his manifold so I could do a bench test on both products. Yep, I can definitely feel gunk there. It's soft. Oh, check that out. Whoa. By that time, unfortunately, the Revive was all gone, but Direction Plus kindly sent me a second bottle free of charge, which I'll use for these extra tests as well as in part 2 of this video when my own manifold's getting clogged up. So let's get this gunk into some sample cups. We'll add in a bit of each product, Liqui-Moly on the left, Revive on the right, and let's set the timer. 4 minutes later, the Liqui-Moly is definitely darker than the Revive, even though it started off lighter. Now this is the same as what we saw earlier with the carbon test. We're nearly at 6 minutes now, so let's give each product a bit of a swirl and see how much material's come loose. Now clearly there's a bit of material breaking off in the Liqui-Moly's cup, but not so much in the Revive. It sort of tended to stick together a whole lot more. Now if you take a closer look at the Liqui-Moly, you can actually see the liquid is moving. This is caused by the solvent breaking down the gunk and new loose material being discharged into the product. When we have a look at the Revive, we see there's a whole lot less going on actually. It's not really doing much at all. And after 10 minutes, you can clearly see how much darker Liqui-Moly's gone compared to the Revive. So what have we learned? Well, it seems pretty clear that in the test we did today, Liqui-Moly Diesel Intake Decarb did a much better job than Revive at breaking down both dry carbon and oily manifold deposits. It comfortably outperformed Revive in both bench tests and by a smaller margin on the actual manifold. However, while Liqui-Moly seemed to work better overall, remember it's only designed to clean the intake manifold onwards, whereas Revive can potentially clean the whole intake system from right back before the turbo. Now, Revive didn't do a lot for the early intake plumbing on this particular vehicle because its catch can meant the coatings were already pretty dry, but we did see how good a job it did when there was some oil for it to work on, so that bodes well for the next video where we'll be testing Revive on a vehicle with oily buildup. It's important to point out that neither product actually worked particularly well at thoroughly cleaning a dry carbony manifold. You may remember in my first catch can review I mentioned I'd used a can of Liqui-Moly to try cleaning the dry sooty manifold deposits with little success. Today we've put a whole bottle of Revive through this vehicle, but remember how much carbon was still in the manifold afterwards. When we took the manifold off and sprayed each product on the carbon, the Liqui-Moly eventually did a better job, but we still had to physically loosen it with a scrubbing brush before we got through to the alloy. So what's my recommendation? If you've got a catch can, honestly, neither product is really going to work that well, but Liqui-Moly will probably do a better job than Revive, especially if you stop the clean halfway through and let the product soak in for a bit. If you don't have a catch can, the answer is a bit more complicated. Even though Liqui-Moly worked better on the oily sludge bench test, without a catch can it's likely your whole intake system's oiled up, in which case Revive might be the better choice for cleaning all of that out, possibly followed up with Liqui-Moly for the manifold. If this result's going to stop you wasting money on a product that won't suit your needs, please hit the thanks button below and consider making a small donation. Your support helps purchase the products I review and covers a bit of my time in putting an extensive test like this together. Thanks for your support. But how much of a difference does an oily intake really make anyway? Does it matter if the intercooler's got a layer of oil on it? And does Revive actually remove oily manifold deposits when it's run through the engine as per the directions? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at in the next video in this series. I've removed the catch can from this vehicle now, and we're about to spend 6 months travelling parts of the Australian outback with our caravan, which will send plenty of blow-by oil through this now spotless manifold. Once we've got enough oil in the intake, I'll try to repeat the intercooler efficiency test which was originally part of this video, so we can see how well Revive removes the oil and whether it actually makes any practical difference. So make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss that video when it comes. But that's all for now, so I'll catch you next time.